Good afternoon and welcome to Energy Talks, our webinar series where we are very excited to introduce to you today Taylor Longacre. I will give you a little bit about her, her history in a moment. The name of our topic of discussion today is travel and how do we get there from here post-pandemic, which is on everyone's mind as cruise ships and airlines and drive travel, all of which are gearing up to the new normal. So let me introduce Taylor Cole Longacre, who spent more than 14 years leading PR and marketing for global brands such as Hotels.com, ID90, Travel, Sabre, Expedia Group, and Kimberly-Clark. She's the host of global travel show Hotel Hunt on Amazon Prime Video, and the hotel expert for the Canadian syndicated radio program and podcast, The Informed Traveler. Taylor also executive produces and hosts other TV shows on Amazon Prime Video, including the business show The Focus and the public speaker showcase called Speak Up. Follow along with Taylor at Travel with TLC. Taylor's been in this industry for a very long time. She was also a very valued client for a number of years when we were fortunate enough to be agency of record of Hotels.com. So we're going to open up. First of all, welcome Taylor, and thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you, Esther. It's always great to spend time visiting with you, and this is a very important topic.
Absolutely, absolutely. So as the travel expert, I've got a couple of questions here. We've asked our audience as well to please key in any questions that you might have. I will certainly integrate that into the context of our conversation, but I have a few questions, if you don't mind, Taylor, that I'd like to start with. Travel and healthcare clearly are two of the industries that have been hit hardest by COVID-19. In your view, will travel get back to normal? And if so, I know it's difficult to give us timelines, but when do you see travel, coming back to some sort of state of normalcy?
Right. Normal is pretty relative, When I think about my nieces and nephews, for example, they don't know what travel pre-9/11 was. So travel has changed definitely just since then. I think that sadly, things will be drastically different than the way we enjoyed travel in the past. And things are continually evolving day after day. For example, the states and the cities and the counties, parishes that have opened up. And meanwhile, things are changing with hotels on how they are going to be able to welcome guests. I think there's three main areas that we have to look at for travel, and it's trust, safety, and flexibility. We all need to have confidence in the fact that we can travel and we can go where we want to go. I think travel is the most resilient industry that we have out there. People love to travel. It tops bucket list. When people dream of what they want to do after retirement, one of the top things they say is travel. And so I know people will want to continue traveling, and many businesses depend on travel in order to do commerce. So trust, and then that safety piece is highly important as well. We need to feel safe. We need to feel confident that we won't get sick when we're trying to go on a family vacation or conduct business when we travel to another city or country for a business trip. And then the last piece is flexibility, really knowing that you have the ability to make a change should something change immediately. Should there be an outbreak, should something happen, that you have the ability to change that reservation without penalty is something that we all are wanting that reassurance of, or at least to know that it's not an option.
Right, which kind of segues into my next question. What will be the consumer expectation? And I think you pretty much said it all, but I know that there are all kinds of issues relative to, vouchers and refunds and so on. And clearly, most of the industry is not in a position to be able to fulfill all of these requirements right away, given that this is so sudden. And quite frankly, they're looking at liquidity and surviving just on a day-to-day. So not only is it a question of what will consumers expect from the industry, but what are they willing to put up with, essentially? I know it's, after 9/11, we can take off our shoes. We have to take off our shoes, but now is it a question of having our temperature taken or our blood taken? What are we prepared as consumers of travel to put up with.
Yeah, that's interesting as well, Esther, because I've got right here, I've got, a couple of masks. I've designed with different colors. So, but I've got my mask ready, and I've got my hand sanitizer, and I've got wipes, and I have a thermometer of my own, so I can check my own temperature. But it's true. What are we willing to put up with? I do think there's one area, for example, is when I arrive somewhere, I want to see people cleaning. I don't think it's enough for someone to tell me, yes, we've sanitized these counters and we've mopped the floors. I actually want to see that they are continually doing it as me and anyone else comes through their facility or establishment. And I think I want to know what other protocols they're taking. And so I think that transparency and just keeping consumers informed is really important. But then I also recognize that I have a personal responsibility to do everything I can to protect myself, whether it's keeping that mask with me, bringing gloves, sanitizing my own hotel room if I have to, but thinking ahead on what I might need to do in the event the systems don't follow through as I might expect them to.
Right, exactly. When we talk travel, we tend to differentiate between business and leisure, which would include family travel and so on. How will these sectors rebound from the pandemic? Who do you think will start traveling first, and how will that progress?
Yeah, that's a kind of a challenging question, right? Because things continue to evolve. I know essential travel is critical right now, and we have to keep working on that definition of what is essential. Is it that you're going to an educational institution? Is that you're a healthcare worker and you are delivering much needed supplies, or you're going to care for an elderly family member, or you're doing business that can only be done in person? So really looking at what essential travel is in the short term. And then beyond that, I think for leisure travel specifically, we're going to see a lot more drive destinations. So places that I know I can get in my own car and go to, and I will still travel, but it will be differently than I might have done just 6 months ago. And even for business travel, it might be a little different too, where maybe I'll take a flight, but when I get to the hotel, I'm going to be taking the responsibility myself, or maybe my employer will require that I behave a certain way when I get to that hotel, that I follow certain protocols so that when I do come back to the office, that I'm not putting my fellow coworkers at risk too.
Excellent. We've got a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to cover off on the ones that I already have and then feed into this growing list. In your opinion, Taylor, how will travel brands behave differently now that COVID-19 has happened?
Yeah. I go back to those three things I mentioned before: the trust, safety, and flexibility. There's also a responsibility for these travel brands to be upfront and inform consumers about what they're doing. There's great partnerships that are happening out there where major hotel brands are working with sanitation and cleaning companies and trying to make sure that they're doing everything they can to keep people safe. So I think sharing what you're doing, and from a communication standpoint, and Esther, you and I are both PR people, when we look at what our responsibility is, it's really to inform. And while many executives may have wanted to take a step back in the February, March, April timeframe of early 2020 and not necessarily communicate yet, we couldn't sit around and be paralyzed. We had to get out there and share at least what we're doing in the short term. And with the news cycle being what it is, you can do that. You can continue to share and let people know what's going on, what's happening. And so I think that it's important that travel brands be very upfront and honest about what they're able to do, on how they're serving you. We're all in this together. The travel brands have employees. They're on the front lines. They want to keep them safe, as well as the customers that walk through their doors or get on their planes or get on their cruise ships. They're wanting to protect us all.
Absolutely, which segues well into one of our listeners' questions. And I guess this is, again, one of the $64,000 questions is do you think that cruise ships with 5,000 people plus will continue to be filled to capacity. And it says, I've been on a ship with Nova virus, and that was scary.
Yeah, I right now I don't think so. I don't think that makes sense for social distancing to have a massive amount of people on a ship unless they can figure out some way to keep them controlled and make people feel as if they've got enough distance between them and somebody who's from another country, someone they don't know. I think there's a lot of questions there. I certainly, feel for the cruise industry, and I want to see them back up and running. And I know people love cruise travel, and I think that some smart people work there and can figure this out. It's the same thing, and I'll just give an example of my church. My church opened this past weekend, but it was unlike any other worship that we had before. They were socially distancing people from the time you drove up into the parking lot until you got into the worship center. And so, it's a different way of behaving. It's a different way of welcoming people in and of creating experiences, maybe with smaller groups of people than you would have before. And I know we're talking about cruises a little bit right now, but I noticed, for example, on a hotel website yesterday that they weren't behaving differently. When I went to the front page of that website, one of the first things I saw was a big happy hour with lots of people enjoying cocktails. And no one was socially distanced. There wasn't a message of cleanliness or safety or anything like that. And so that's an example of what probably not to do, is that we need to be relevant for the times and what we're facing today. More than likely, unless they're in a different state and they've already changed their protocols, they're not going to be able to welcome guests in and have that big happy hour or a group convention type experience starting tomorrow. So showcase the real experience of what people can expect right now.
Right. No, absolutely. I can agree with you more. We have another question here. Airbnb has just laid off many people and said that it is changing its focus. Do you think this is going to be a safe way to travel moving forward?
The vacation rental business, I'm hearing that there are some segments that are still wanting to do that. And again, that all goes back to the trust. What level of trust do I have in the owner of that home and what they're doing to keep me safe when I get there with my family and friends? So for example, for the uber luxury segment, for people who are spending that high dollar, maybe flying on a private jet to get to that island or wherever they're going and to rent the entire house on a Verbo, maybe that is another option. And then they know that it's been cleaned, or maybe there's a certification, or maybe there's some kind of a guarantee that that homeowner is going to provide, saying they've actually done the work to clean to a certain level of standards, similar to what we would expect from hotels and other facilities.
And that can be interesting, because when Airbnb mentions that they've, that there may be some changes, I'd like to be able to assume that information will be on their platform. So, these Airbnb destinations may have a responsibility to indicate exactly that. What are they doing in their respective, properties in their neck of the woods to make sure that, we're following protocols, et cetera, et cetera. Because it's going to be, you don't know until you get there. So it's a bit terrifying from that perspective. Another question is that I travel or used to for work quite often, and sitting on a plane crushed between two people is frightening. How do you think air travel will be able to resume? I know we touched on this in various life forms, but can you add to that somewhat?
For example, so I did a test booking for this weekend just to see what the load was like and what the booking experience looks like today. So I'm coming from Texas, where we've opened up to some degree, and where the headquarters of American Airlines is. And so when I checked, the middle seats were all blocked, with the exception of a couple of rows that looked like they may have been pre-reserved for family travel. So right now, I'm showing that most carriers, at least US-based carriers, are blocking those middle seats. I know there's been some news about carriers like Frontier very recently, but I personally will be looking for an aisle or a window seat. Actually, I'll be looking for a window seat. That's always my preference anyway. So I'm gonna be looking for a window seat so I can minimize my exposure to others. And I'm really hoping that middle seat is no longer available, at least in the short term. One other thing I noticed when I went to do the booking was that it said face coverings could be required. It said if I booked between now and I think the 11th, it wouldn't be. And then thereafter, I would have to wear a face covering while on the plane. And then depending on which airport I was going to, that I would have to wear a face covering.
Interesting. We've got a very interesting question here. Businesses like Airbnb, Oyo, Expedia, and so on have changed the face of the industry tremendously, as we know. With this new normal post-COVID, do you foresee any new sub-industries emerging within travel and tourism?
Any new industries emerging within travel and tourism? Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, within the sector, do you
Yeah.
see anything new developing as a result?
Well, I tell you this is that when this pandemic first came up, I called one of my good friends and I said, you know what, now is the time for really smart business people to figure out a way for their business to survive and thrive through this. They may not be able to do business the way they've always done it. And so now's the time to make a shift in the way that you do business. If you were contingent upon people walking into your doors and selling muffins directly and handing them the muffin and giving out samples, that's going to be different. And so looking at ways that you can do business differently. There's a company, for example, they're called SeatsX, and they're primarily a transportation company getting people from point A to point B, but also they have another division where they ship packages and products. They completely changed their business model during this pandemic so that they could better serve people, so they could get groceries to people who needed them, so that they could get packages and much needed medical supplies to people who needed them. And so, for example, I think there's going to be creative business models that will come out of this, where people have been able to take the infrastructure of some really smart thinking and things they've already set up and adapt that to where we're going. And that's exciting to see.
No, it'll be very interesting to see how that morphs into various different products or services and so on. Apart from the obvious, and we know, communication is key, and more communication is better, certainly in this point in time. But hotels, and that's certainly a core competency of yours. I mean, how are they going to re-earn our confidence? I mean, will they be changing? At the best of times, there's always that feeling that, the bed sheets aren't necessarily changed all the time, or the comforters, the pillows, the magazines in the rooms. I mean, how are they going to earn back our confidence?
I think there's going to be a movement of cleanliness protocols. And I think we've seen that with some of the major box chains already, where they're saying they have committed to certain levels of standards. We're seeing that they're very transparent about those standards and allowing consumers to read and learn about it. And then similar to what I was saying before is, I know for me, I want to see someone cleaning. I probably will want to come into a facility, into a hotel, resort, Verbo, vacation rental. I'm going to want to smell some cleaning products when I get there, so that at least I have the perception that they have done what they needed to do, so that they've followed the protocols and kept the facility clean. And then I'm going to question, how long before I checked into that room was someone else staying in that same room? And what was done? Were the sheets entirely changed? I want to know what happens before I check into that room. And I think they're going to have to be transparent about that. There's so many things that I think we'll have questions about, especially when it comes to hotel stays. For example, I've noticed that many hotels aren't offering the buffets any longer. So no more buffets, but instead they're creating more of an intimate experience of room service. The gyms are going to look differently. So maybe a trend that we saw before, people being able to pick up yoga mats and weights and working out in their room or following nature trails. There's going to be more of an emphasis on things like that, where there's less of a need to have to clean large spaces in order to keep people safe.
So would you encourage consumers to ask those questions on, when you make your reservations? Is that going to be standard fare?
Absolutely. And I think travel brands need to respond accordingly. They're going to get tired of answering the same questions over and over again. So they just need to make it known up front. This is what we're doing to protect you. This is our open door policy with management, where if you have a question or concern, you can come speak to us. I think staff needs to be trained, because if I see housekeeping in the hallway, and I'm going to ask, when did you clean my room last? Or, what are the standards that you're following in order to keep my family and friends and my business colleagues safe? And so I think the team members are going to need to be informed on exactly what are they doing, and be able to articulate that back to guests.
Excellent. A timing question, but it's certainly, one that gives us your perspective. I know that there's no definitive answer, but we do know that some of the cruise lines are saying that they will be sailing again come August 1. Some of the airlines are claiming they'll be up and running as soon as July. Do you think that's realistic?
I know that there's a mood, at least where I am, there's a mood to get businesses back up and running. There's a mood, there's a movement to whatever that, and I don't like the term new normal, but whatever that new future, whatever that new way of doing business looks, to get there and start doing it now. So, I think that we are going to move into that probably a bit more quickly than what a lot of people would think, but it depends on where you are. So in Texas, we're in a different situation than they are in California, than they are in Kentucky, than you are in Canada and other countries. And so, I think it all depends on where you are. So one travel brand with multiple locations across many countries performs and behaves differently in each and every one of those countries. And so I think we really have to look at that. With cruise lines, it might depend on where your ports of call might be. Where are you going, and how will you need to behave once you get to that other country? So, there's a lot of variables there, but I do know that, I want to have a level of trust with those brands, and I'm expecting them to share with me what they're doing, and then also let me know what is my own responsibility.
Excellent. Excellent. We have a very Canadian specific question, and you can appreciate this. As a senior, I typically spend the winter in Florida, but I can't imagine that any insurance company will cover me for COVID. Any thoughts about us snowbirds and how that may affect our decision relative to where to go and how to travel there?
Gosh, I know for Florida that the snowbird community is such a vital and important part of their plans and their budgets, and the way they build experiences. And so I certainly hope that will be back open and welcoming, and with needs and with experiences built for the senior community in mind. So, I think it's the same thing, though, even more so for seniors, where there's going to need to be that level of honesty and being upfront and speaking to the truth of what they're doing. And then also of having options available. For example, I read last night about a hotel that has a healthcare worker on site. And so that person is there, maybe it's a nurse, maybe it's a physician's assistant, or even a doctor that's available on site to care for and to treat anyone who may fall ill. So I think there's going to need to be a change where we have more readily available healthcare support while we're traveling.
Excellent. A question: how is this going to change the respective, channels, like airlines and like cruise ships and bus travel, train travel in general, in terms of are they going to be leaner? Are they going to be more expensive? Are they streamlining apart from just the cleanliness? How do you see this changing the actual physicality, if you will, of some of these major players?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm seeing, well, we need to generate demand again. Sadly, for these travel brands, they're not making any money hardly. I know for the airlines, they have been able to shift and move to a cargo model in many cases. I took a ground transportation company called Von Lane, and they were socially distancing there, and they were at about 90% capacity when I traveled on them in March. So at the very early stages of the impacts of shelter in place. So I think you're going to see some differences in how they behave. Right now, I'm finding that fares or the price to book travel, whatever channel that is, the prices are down. But we know that even those travel suppliers who have accepted federal funds, that they're all reporting at a loss right now. And so there's going to be a balance, I think, of trying to recoup and also trying to generate demand again. And then also to be smart, knowing that the unemployment rates are up. And so people are maybe strapped for cash right now, but they still want to travel. Maybe they have to travel. And so being respectful and understanding that, you know, people may not be willing to pay what we were this time last year.
Correct. Very good point. We've gone from seniors to millennials. We have a question here. My son is finishing college and was hoping to take the summer off to travel. This may not be possible because of travel restrictions, but do you think that traveling is risky for young adults who may not be as conscientious?
Well, we've seen some, I'll call them bad actors. We've seen some spring breakers that, you know, kind of had a disregard for social distancing and safety. On the other hand, there's a lot of smart people out there who also want to protect themselves. They recognize that while they may not be as vulnerable, at least according to the statistics, but they have the potential to hurt their parents and grandparents if they do get infected with COVID-19. So I do think that people aren't going to stop traveling. There's still the drive locations. There's still potentially some parks once those open up. I have family and friends that are going to ranches. They're going to their own private properties or the properties of friends. So there's a lot of places that people can still go. It just may not look the way it did in the past. And again, it all depends on which country, which city, state, parish, province, where that is that you're intending to go. But, you know, I can be at a lake in a matter of minutes here in Texas. I could be at a park. So there's so many other options, other ways to travel. It just may not look the way that it would have looked in years past.
Correct. Good. Interesting. Another one of our listeners, you mentioned that the travel industry is not making any money currently, but as a consumer, do you think that price cuts will serve as an incentive, or is the industry best to continue to promise care and safety? What do you think is going to, push the decision-making process either way?
Well, sadly, I've known people who were impacted by COVID-19, and I have some close friends who lost family members to it. This has been life and death. Safety first, absolutely. I want to know that everyone's doing everything they can to ensure that we are safe. So that's the utmost important to me first. And then price, absolutely. I don't want to overpay, or I don't want to pay more than what I can afford to pay for a trip that I know historically would have been, X% cheaper. But I think that safety has to come first. And then after that, if you have the means to still travel and that fits your budget, I think there's going to be something for everyone. And that's the great thing about our travel ecosystem, is we've got so much choice when it comes to travel, and so much choice in the types of stays and the way we get there, and the type of experiences that we have once we get there. It's just going to be a little different.
Yeah, one of the questions I have is from a reimbursement point of view. I know a lot of travel, industry partners are really not in a position to refund in full right now. Liquidity is certainly key in staying viable until they get back on their feet. But a lot of them do offer vouchers, and the vouchers extend, for example, to 2021, which is probably the latest that I've seen it extend to. Should vouchers be open-ended? What if you can't travel in 2021? Should the industry just say, your voucher's open for a 5-year, limitation or so on, but we welcome you within that period of time?
I think it's going to be up to the travel supplier. For example, I worked for a major online travel agency in the past, and we were only able to present what the travel supplier, what that hotel or airline or car rental company, what they provided us and the way they wanted us to present their policy. So absolutely, I would say flexibility is key. And that's one of those three main points that I mentioned up front. I think flexibility is important. And we just don't know what's going to happen. I would love to say that we've passed this and that things will get 100% better and this will be just a distant memory soon, but we don't know. And so I think flexibility really is important if the brand wants to retain the customer potentially.
Exactly, exactly. And a question for you and I, and for those who are listening, who are in the communications profession, for communicators in the travel and tech space, how has our role changed or shifted? What's our responsibility right now?
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask you, Esther, first, because you lead a large team and you're counsel to a number of big brands. How has that changed for you?
Well, clearly authenticity and transparency is key. And you know, we've advised or counseled our clients, you know, to cease and desist on anything that might be presumed or interpreted as fluffy, if you will, in, you know, in our communications. Like, less about the amenities on a plane or a train or, you know, a boat. At this point, it really is messages of, you know, safety and flexibility and trust and empathy. First and foremost, the fact that certainly, you know, these are the measures that we're taking to ensure that you will have a safe and a secure passage to wherever you're going, that we're going above and beyond relative to safety and sanity and hygienity, etc. So it really is that messaging that we're encouraging our clients to communicate. And we've, you know, had to stand our ground in terms of, you know, anyone who really wants to communicate otherwise. I don't think there's an interest about, you know, chocolates in first class right now. I think it's really all about, you know, is our crew safe? Are they hygienically modified? You know, what are you doing? So yeah, that would be our messaging.
Yeah, and I want to give kudos to my fellow colleagues or former colleagues in some companies, but for PR people, communicators in the travel industry, we're often the most nimble. We have a unique worldview of how things go because we're working with people, whether coworkers or team members or customers, suppliers across many different countries, speaking different languages, different cultures. And so we have a unique view. And, you know, when this pandemic first happened, you know, I had former colleagues and friends who were in China, and I had, you know, friends in the Dominican Republic. And so, you know, this is a family of people, and many of our workers are on the front lines. And so I think there's that level of care for the people that are part of our team, that we have to step it up and be there for them. And so there's that employee comms piece. Also, there's that public facing piece with our customers and really reassuring them. And then of course for our suppliers. And so there's a lot of pieces there, but it all goes back to what you're saying, Esther, on that level of trust. And then not to get paralyzed in trying to figure out what the best thing is to say, but to be upfront and honest about what you're doing now in the short term and what you know and how you're here to help. I've found that so many of the great travel brands were part of the solution. They were coming forth and saying, you know, here's what we can do to help you right now, whether that was a flexible cancellation policy or sending supplies or opening up their doors because they could no longer welcome traditional guests, but they could be there to help healthcare workers get a good night's rest before they go back to their next shift. And so there's different things that we've been able to do and communicate these great stories of heroic support that these brands are doing to help people through this really crazy time.
Absolutely, it's unprecedented, and it really is a moment by moment. It's a very fluid situation, and it's really hard to plan, if you will. And it's an interesting time, but from challenges, you know, crisis come opportunities, as they say. A question, we touched on this briefly, but as another one of our questions is, which destinations, in your opinion, are likely to attract visitors in the early post-COVID-19 phases? I mean, is everybody going to Disneyland, or are people going to go to remote locations where they can, to your point, hike or sit by a lake or boat, quietly, privately, and distanced.
Yeah. I think right now it's going to be those drive destinations and wherever those may be relative to you. If it's Esther going to the cottage, if it's for me going to a park or to a beach that's at the border of Texas, things like that. Looking at where you might be able to drive to could be the first option. The other area I think that we're going to see that will hopefully continue in popularity will be wellness. Many of us, we want to be refreshed and going someplace, and wellness can look differently for a lot of people. It used to be for me just, a world-class spa, but that could be different now. But someplace potentially where you're outdoors and you can get fresh air and you can, hike or bike. I think those types of destinations are going to fare well too. And then I mentioned that the uber luxury, that high dollar, high end type experience where maybe you're taking a private jet or a charter jet traveling, and then you've got that Verbo or the whole house rental. I think those types of places will fare well also.
Excellent. And one kind of final question to round this off. Again, the $1,000,000 question, how is this going to change the face of travel? I hate to throw such a hugely generic question at you, but we touched on the safety and the security and so on, but when we go through security and we check in, how's it going to look? What is the future of travel? How's it going to look, with all, navigating through all those, checkpoints, etc. We know what it potentially might look like on a plane or on a ship, but how is that going to change our day to day? I mean, we've just gotten used to taking off our shoes and our belts and barely. What are next steps? What can we anticipate?
I wish I had a great view and be able to tell you this time 6 months from now, Esther, this is what it's going to look like. But I will say that, clearly there's some things that are going to have to change. We've seen, for example, with flights, a change in food and beverage. The food and beverage service will be drastically different. Maybe people wearing face masks, at least until we get to a certain level where we flatten the curve. That could be different. Cruising might be different. But I'm noticing though, for example, when you go to a restaurant or if you have any places that have opened up yet, people are starting to get relaxed, and people are getting more relaxed quicker than I thought they would. People are starting to want to hug each other. And I'm like, wow, we just barely made it through this, and they're already wanting to behave in the way they did before. And so, I don't have a crystal ball to say what it's all going to look like. I do know it's going to be different. I never imagined that I wouldn't be able to carry, liquids through the TSA security line, but that's a reality today. Taking off my shoes, all these things that we've become accustomed to, potentially carrying a mask could be the new way, at least for the short term. So, I think we're going to find that there's things that we will accept because we know it's for our good and we know it's for our personal protection. There's always going to be those outliers who don't support it and don't believe that we need to do that. On the other hand, the numbers have been real in the past where we've unfortunately lost people due to this pandemic. And so I think there's going to be a level of personal responsibility where I was always carrying hand sanitizer with me. I was always carrying wipes in my bag, whether I was going to use them on the plane or in the hotel or what, but I always had handy wipes with me. So I had that level of personal responsibility. Others maybe or maybe didn't feel the same way. So I think we're also going to recognize what we're willing to do to protect ourselves.
And finally, as an industry expert and in all objectivity, do you really feel that the travel industry is doing enough to communicate all of these important messages?
Well, speaking from my colleague standpoint, and I have so much respect for the great individuals of these big travel brands who are out there right now, the travel publications that are trying to keep us informed, the mainstream media that's trying to share, but the PR people who are on the front lines trying to communicate on behalf of their brands when there's been layoffs or furloughs and things that have been happening. I believe that we are doing the absolute best. We're trying to do the best that we can to share the information that we have and that we have the confidence to be able to share with the public. I think it's minute by minute. States are changing and making decisions, as we speak. People are counting the number of cases and recoveries and deaths due to this unfortunate pandemic. And so I think we're doing the best we can to try to share what we know and to keep consumers informed. And so, I think time's going to tell. I think consumers will speak up and say, you know what, airline, you know what, hotel, we want more information. We want more from you, and we want you to do more. And I hope that these travel brands will be nimble and will respond to that. I think that, again, from a communication standpoint, we need to share. We need to stay upfront and honest about what we're doing and be honest about what we don't know. But I think there's a good movement going on right now. Again, when I go to those travel websites and I'm seeing the disclosures right there, reminding people to check the CDC and WHO guidelines and to double check that their state is not restricting their travel and that they won't accept their reservation if they find they've come from a country that's prohibited to come in. And so I think there's some of that transparency by smart travel brands that we can find.
Excellent. So to wrap this up, it's transparency, authenticity, honesty, flexibility, empathy. That's all we want to see from the travel industry. We know that it's here to stay. It might come back modified somewhat. We have to be prepared for some changes in the actual physicality of traveling and those checkpoints. There may be more. They may look differently. We just have to be patient and see this through. Taylor, I really thank you so much for taking the time. Know how very busy your schedule is. You do so much in one given day, and for you to take the time out for us today is extremely appreciated. Thank you. Thank you,
Esther, and thank you to your team. Great job in putting this together to continue to educate and inform people on the great work and to get us talking about it, because hopefully from forums like this and others that I've seen, this will raise those questions, and hopefully the travel brands and even consumer brands will be listening.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Taylor, for taking the time today. Bless you, my friend.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.